Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start business, can I remind members that social distancing measures are in place in the chamber and right across the Holyrood campus. So please take care to observe these measures over the course of this afternoon's business, including when entering and exiting the chamber. And the first item of business is portfolio questions. And the first portfolio is rural economy and tourism. If a member wishes to request a supplementary question, please press your request to speak button, or if you are joining us remotely, please indicate in the chat function by entering the letter R during the relevant question. Question number 1 is Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Ask the Scottish Government how it will take forward a tourism recovery plan for Ayrshire and what role it believes digital technology can play in assisting with this.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Tourism Recovery Task Force will publish its recommendations imminently, and in the context of these, we will consider what actions are required at a national and regional level. Any actions will build upon our £103 million investment through the Ayrshire Growth Deal and our programme for government commitment to promote Ayrshire as a tourism destination. Through this, we're investing £1 million in tourism developments, which includes the establishment of the COIG, an industry body which is using digital marketing technologies to work closer with the private and public sectors to encourage more visits to the area.
Willie Coffey.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? He will be aware of some of the new ideas using digital technology that have emerged out of necessity during this health emergency. For example, online food and delivery by restaurants and local shops, online performances by musicians, and even the online broadcast and participation within the Parliament itself. Does the Cabinet Secretary recognise that digital solutions can play a big part in helping to enhance the tourist experience with perhaps more online content and interactions, offering a quality experience for visitors to Scotland that might not be possible in person, but is possible using digital technology?
Fergus Ewing.
Yes, Presiding Officer, I do agree with Mr Coffey that digital technology has come to the fore during COVID, perhaps through necessity as we are using it right now, and therefore it has enabled those adept in its use to bring forward different methods of entertainment, of information, education and promotion of our tourism economy. So I do think that the use of said technology will play a part in the future as Mr Coffey is advocating.
Short supplementary, please, from John Scott.
Presiding Officer, the Cabinet Secretary will be aware of the huge effect COVID-19 has had on bed and breakfast numbers, hotel bookings and visitors to Ayrshire. What further measures can be taken to support this sector in Ayr, Prestwick and Troon, as the proposed development of the COIG makes little difference to South Ayrshire?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I think Mr Scott raises an important point, Presiding Officer. You know, bed and breakfasts are a very important segment of accommodation providers within the tourism sector overall. We value their work. And we did, in the earlier period of the COVID lockdown, endeavour to ensure that there was reasonable access to those bed and breakfast businesses dependent upon this business for their livelihood, to have access to financial support. That was part, Presiding Officer, of an overall package of £2.3 billion. So that support was intended to provide a lifeline to businesses to help them through COVID. But of course, as Mr Scott perhaps implies, COVID has gone on for longer than any of us wish. And therefore, I do now think that it is sensible for the UK government to reconsider what more needs to be done to promote and protect and indeed rescue tourism around these islands. I won't go into the details, Presiding Officer, as that would take too much time, but I do advocate that the UK government should work in partnership with us in order to help businesses like bed and breakfast survive COVID, which is going on longer than anyone would have expected or wished.
Can I just draw people's attention to question number 1 has taken an over long time. We're not going to get nearly through these questions unless people bear in mind that they should be a bit more succinct. Question number 2, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support is available for major projects in the North East to drive the area's tourism sector.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government and its agencies continue to support projects to boost tourism in the North East of Scotland through the Murray and Aberdeen City and Region growth deals, through the Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund, and in the case of Lossiemouth East Beach footbridge, directly.
Liam Kerr.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Aberdeen Harbour project will be a key driver of tourism to the North East, not least due to the intended cruise ship capacity. However, in July, we learned its construction has been delayed to 2022. So what discussions has the Cabinet Secretary had with the project to identify what they need, and what support will be made available to ensure the project is completed by the new date?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the member is correct that the Aberdeen Harbour is a major project, and indeed, when I was Energy Minister some years ago, I had the pleasure of visiting Harbour, meeting the project sponsors, and discussing the exciting project with them. It is a trust port and is run by an independent board for the benefit of its stakeholders. The issue is not directly, Presiding Officer, within my purview and my portfolio, but I do know that the Scottish Government is in fairly close contact with the sponsors of the project, and it has been delayed, yes, but I'm hopeful and confident that these delays will be overcome and that the project may be completed as early, I'm told, as possibly next year, which would bring substantial benefits to Aberdeen and the North East economy generally.
Supplementary from Shona Robson.
Thank you. Given the V&A Dundee has been a transforming investment for the North East attractiveness as a visitor destination, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm what investment the Scottish Government has made in the V&A and what role the Scottish Government considers museums have to play in the recovery of our tourism economy?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the Scottish Government has been substantially supportive in finance of the project and a stalwart supporter from the beginning, and yes, Shona Robinson has been an advocate for the benefits of the project since inception and seen it through, of course, and it is now delivering an excellent attraction for the citizens of Dundee, and it has, I think, helped to further embed the reputation of Dundee as the city of discovery and much more in the eyes not just of Scotland but further afield as well. And highlight the key role it plays in the area of design and innovation. So this has been an outstanding project and the Scottish Government has supported it handsomely.
Question number 3, Alistair Allen.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to encourage new entrants to Crofting.
Fergus Ewing.
Officer, last year there were 458 new entrants into Crofting. The Scottish Government has a range of support available to potential new entrants. Our Croft House Grant and Crofting Agricultural Grant Scheme, so-called CAGs, remain accessible, and our farm advisory services continues to offer to crofters advisory and mentoring services. On the 8th of July this year, I announced £325,000 additional funding for the Crofting Commission to expand crofting development activities and create new commission jobs in the Western Isles in Dr. Allen's constituency, not least after substantial lobbying from himself that there be dispersal of such employment. And as mentioned in the programme for government, we have committed to extending the work of the Scottish Land Matching Service to increase crofting opportunities for new entrants.
Alistair Allen.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. Does he share my concern that the rising asking prices for many croft tenancies, this is a particular issue in areas which are suffering depopulation, For example, a croft tenancy in my constituency was recently advertised with the staggering asking price of £200,000. While this is an extreme example, it does illustrate how inflated the market has sometimes become. And if young families are priced out of crofting, this will obviously threaten the island's sustainability and culture. So is there more the Scottish Government feels it can do to address that particular issue?
Fergus Ewing.
Yes, and I know my colleagues Aileen Campbell and Kevin Stewart are extremely active in considering with the local authority and other local partners more provision of housing. In addition to that, in my own area, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has approved Croft House grant payments of over £21 million to help build and improve over 1,000 Croft homes. But whereas that is welcome, it doesn't directly address the problems Dr Allen correctly identifies. The Crofting Commission, therefore, is increasing its work to enforce crofters' adherence to duties, in some cases leading to the assignation or sale of the croft to a new entrant. But the wider problem of price inflation is an extremely serious one, which requires a wide variety of different measures to tackle, and the Scottish Government is dealing with a lot of and implementing a lot of them, Presiding Officer, I'm very pleased to say.
Question number 4, Joan McAlpine.
Thank you very much. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the reported concerns of the National Sheep Association that the future trade deals with Australia and New Zealand negotiated by the UK Government could negatively impact Scotland's sheep farmers.
Mary Goujon.
A trade agreement with both parties would create significant challenges to the UK agricultural sector and specifically Scottish sheep farmers, as we and stakeholders regularly point out. Now, at a time when the sheep sector stands to lose tariff-free access to the European market for a third of its product, the threat of additional Australian and New Zealand lamb being imported into the UK market further undercuts Scottish producers. And even the UK Government expects the economic benefits to the UK from these deals to be minuscule. We need the UK Government to live up to its promises about maintaining standards for imports.
Joan McAlpine.
Thank you. The Scottish Farmer newspaper has reported Phil Stalker of the NSA warning that Antipodean free trade deals will result in our market being flooded with cheap meat produced at lower environmental and animal welfare standards. Does the Minister agree with me that it's completely unacceptable, particularly as our hard-pressed sheep farmers could also lose the European market that accounts for 30 to 40% of their sale?
Mary Goujon.
I absolutely agree with Joan McAlpine and with the comments that she referenced from Phil Stalker, because our sheep farmers have very little to look forward to when we leave the EU. They'll face tariff as well as non-tariff barriers to trade, as well as an increase in pressure from the trade agreements with two of the largest sheep meat exporters, with Australia and New Zealand. Because I think it's important to remember that in the event that no free trade agreement is reached between the UK and the EU, tariffs of around 40 to 50% will be applied to Scottish sheep meat that's destined for EU consumers. And Scottish sheep meat producers export around £400 million worth of products each year, with 88% of exports destined for European consumers. So this has the potential to be catastrophic for the industry. And it's not just us who are raising how damaging this can be, because the UK Government's own economic modelling suggests that the Scottish agricultural sector is likely to be adversely impacted from any free trade agreement with Australia and New Zealand. And even with all that, there's still been no confirmation of all the Brexit costs coming from Treasury, as Michael Gove has previously promised.
Question number 5, John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what impact it expects on Scotland's rural economy and Scotland's producers' ability to export their goods of the proposed Kent Access Permit Scheme.
Mary Goujon.
It's quite simply lamentable that we're now having to prepare to face Brexit's consequences, such as huge delays to exporting through Kent. We've continually raised concerns about the impact of operational barriers, and the UK Government has only recently proposed this solution. It's consulted on traffic management for the Kent area and proposed a system for hauliers to check that they're ready to cross the border, and that would be mandatory for those hauliers entering Kent. However, the UK Government has yet to publish the outcome of that consultation, and and it's not clear if they intend to share those outcomes with us as well as with the other devolved nations ahead of publication. However, following sustained pressure from the Scottish Government, the new proposals do envisage a system of prioritising hauliers carrying live and fresh produce, such as Scottish seafood. And while it remains to be seen how such prioritisation will work in practice, this should help ensure that our exporters have at least a chance of being able to reach EU markets in time.
John Finney.
I thank the Minister for that reply. The Minister will be aware of the UK Cabinet Office scenario of 7,000 plus lorries held for up to 2 days and delays. Completely unacceptable for high-value perishable goods, seafood and live fish. Can I ask the Minister to vigorously pursue clarity and outcome of that consultation with what I readily accept as a non-cooperative UK Government, and ask the Minister to examine opportunities for the Scottish Government to assist and promote the speedy carriage of these time-sensitive goods by rail freight direct continental markets, please?
Marie Goujon.
Oh, absolutely. I can assure John Finney that this is something that the Scottish Government has continually pursued over the past few years throughout the Brexit process. And this is something that we are, of course, continuing to pursue because we absolutely recognise how vital this is for the seafood industry in Scotland. And I would say as well that I know the Cabinet Secretary for Transport has met with the Road Haulage Association recently. And again, as much as we can be told by the UK Government that we are geared up and they're ready for this, we're getting quite a different message when we hear that from industry themselves. And they have outlined their serious concerns that the processes, the IT systems simply won't be ready in time and be ready by the end of the year. But for our part, I can assure the member and I can assure other members across the chamber that the Scottish Government will be doing absolutely everything within our power to help support our industries in Scotland.
Question number 6, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the Fraser-Vallender Institute report, the impact of COVID-19 on the Aran economy, including its comments on how this has affected tourism.
Ferguson.
Presiding Officer, I do agree this is concerning. We know that COVID-19 continues to have a profound impact on our island communities, and we are currently working closely with our partners, including North Ayrshire Council, Taste of Aran and the Aran Economic Group. I don't underestimate the impacts, and I understand that a tailored approach will be necessary. Our £30 million pledge to deliver the National Islands Plan and our new £2 million Islands Green Recovery Programme will be vital, therefore, in stimulating new economic activity across our islands, helping businesses recover from the impacts of the pandemic and creating new and quality jobs.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The report states that, and I quote, on average each day of ferry operation contributes just under £170,000 to Aran's economy. That's over 62 million.
Excuse me, Mr Gibson, we're finding it difficult to hear you, which is, of course, unusual. If you could, if you could put your mic up. If you could take your supplementary.
I do apologise for that, Presiding Officer. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The report states that on average each day of ferry operation contributes just under £170,000 to Aran's economy. That's just over £62 million a year. How can Scottish ministers optimise the ferry service at this difficult time and go even further than the Cabinet Secretary already has gone in supporting island businesses to ensure that Aran's economy survives and can ultimately thrive?
Ferguson.
Well, I absolutely agree that the ferry is, of course, essential to Aran. It's a lifeline service, and it's also the gateway for everybody that visits the island. And it has a marvellous tourism offering, and there have been real difficulties over the COVID period, constraints facing businesses there during lockdown and beyond. So Mr Gibson is absolutely right to say that we do need to ensure that the ferry service is reliable, and we need to look to the future to see what more we can do as to this service, as indeed the Fraser-Vallender Institute recognises that the Aran economy is extremely different to the North Ayrshire economy. And I know that Mr Gibson, in his forthright advocacy over the years for Aran, will continue to make sure that these arguments are kept to the fore.
Question number 7, Jamie Green.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how much of the Sustainable Agriculture Capital Grant Scheme funding has been allocated.
Fergus Ewing.
The £10 million Sustainable Agricultural Capital Grant Scheme opened for applications on the 7th of September this year, and the application window is due to run for a period of 5 weeks, closing on the 11th of October. The applications will then be assessed and grant award letters will be issued thereafter.
Jamie Green.
Many thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for that response. He will be aware, of course, of the value and importance of this to those who have struggled as a result of rural crime. We know that rural crime has risen to £2.3 million in cost to our farmers, and it has more than doubled since 2017. That is a concern to all of us, I'm sure. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what conversation he's having with his justice counterparts to ensure that we are tackling rural crime, and his own department is offering everything they can, financially or otherwise, to those farmers who have struggled as a result of it?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, the member raises a very important point, and one that I have been pursuing rigorously as Cabinet Secretary alongside my colleagues in the Cabinet and working with the police and others in what is a series of despicable crimes which cause enormous difficulty to farmers, and by the very nature, occurring as they are, mostly in rural Scotland, sometimes under dead of night. Evidence is very difficult in many cases to establish because of the lack of eyewitnesses. So this is an issue that I've been pursuing absolutely rigorously for a very long time, Presiding Officer. Perhaps I could just gently point out, however, to Mr Green, that this is not actually relevant to the question that was asked, which was about the Agricultural Transformation Programme, the purpose of which is primarily to assist farmers and crofters in respect of sustainable agriculture, and particularly looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this programme actually has nothing to do directly with crime, but you know, I've no objection to answering a question, albeit its irrelevance to the primary question.
Question number 8, Rachel Hamilton.
To ask the Scottish Government what financial analysis it has carried out of the impact that restrictions on the hospitality sector will have on the wider supply chain.
Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, the measures that have been introduced for the hospitality sector have, like other sectors, been driven by the need to protect public health and drive down transmission of the virus. Economic concerns, however, are important and have, where possible, been balanced in the decision-making progress through the 4 harms approach that the Scottish Government has adopted, that being of direct and indirect health impacts, societal impacts and economic impacts.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And may I draw members to my resignation? Register of interests. No resignation, register of interest. So I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As he will be aware, the impact of restrictions has had a detrimental effect on the hospitality supply chain, especially breweries, merchants, laundry services and wholesalers. Cabinet Secretary, businesses want answers, they want certainty. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to publishing in full the data and scientific evidence behind decisions made for the restrictions put in place today, which may, quite frankly, possibly be the death knell for the hospitality industry?
Fergus Ewing.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear the members not resigning so that we can continue to work together on tourism interests. And I'm very happy to assure and inform the member that I've worked very closely with, for example, the Wholesale Society, and to make sure that so far as possible financial assistance has been available to some of the members who, as she correctly says, are a vital part of the jigsaw in the supply chain to many businesses in tourism and the wider rural economy. The Scottish Government has provided £2.3 billion of assistance. Presiding Officer, every day I'm involved correctly in calls, discussions, engagements, video links with the tourism industry every day, doing our best to assist them and working hard with them. I know how they are suffering. It's just such a shame that the UK government refused to extend the furlough, which was providing an absolute lifeline for so many people in Scotland. and it's not too late for the Chancellor of the Exchequer to reconsider that imprudent decision, which is likely to cost so many people in Scotland their jobs.
That concludes questions on that portfolio. Apologies to those that I wasn't able to call for supplementaries. That's about the time people are taking questions and answers. Could I ask both members and ministers in the next portfolio section to bear that in mind so we can get through them all? And that portfolio is transport, infrastructure and connectivity. So please, if you wish a supplementary question, press your request to speak button or the R button if you're joining us remotely. And question number 1 is Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding changes to infrastructure and consequent improvements to the region's arterial routes that will be required for the Port of Cairnryan after the Brexit transition period ends.
Michael Matheson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government officials have been engaged with the UK Government how the end of the transition period could impact on the ports. But plans are vague and even now many questions remain unanswered from the UK Government. The lack of clarity about import and export processes under the Northern Ireland Protocol is undermining our ability to implement infrastructure and operational readiness requirements. However, we are progressing our appraisal on potential transport interventions which will contribute most to the National Transport Strategy, including the 23 recommendations from the South West Scotland Transport Study, some of which are for the A75 and A77 improvements.
Emma Harper.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. I know I raised issues of Cairnryan at the Rural Committee this morning, and it is concerning that there is a lack of clarity around what's happening with the Port of Cairnryan. It is a strategic route for Ireland and the South West of Scotland. Given this, can the Cabinet Secretary outline what impact he expects the lack of planning combined with the need for checks at the border will have on movement through Cairnryan and on its surrounding arterial routes, the A75 and the A77?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I am aware that Emma Harper raised this matter this morning with me when I was at the REC Committee, but what I can, and I think is important for members to recognise, what I can say is that as yet the UK Government have not confirmed or agreed with the EU what checks will be required between Northern Ireland and Scotland. We do not want to introduce new controls. However, we have a responsibility to inspect certain commodities and we're engaged with the UK Government to try and get these necessary preparations underway. The ports are of course adjacent to a strategic road network, providing access to the rest of the UK. Nonetheless, we are considering enhancements for the A75 and A77. We will, of course, continue to pursue this matter with the UK Government, but it is a matter of very serious concern that we've been provided with a lack of clarity on what arrangements need to be put in place at this particular port. And it's absolutely critical we get clarity on that sooner rather than later.
Supplementary from Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if the Scottish Government has analysed the potential cost to the Scottish economy of the loss of business that is already happening from the Port of Cairnryan to Belfast route as they migrate across to the Dublin, Heysham, Liverpool route due to the poor road and rail infrastructure in the southwest of Scotland?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, as is very clear that we as a government are committed to looking at further infrastructure investment in the southwest of Scotland, as was set out in the South West Scotland Transport Corridor Study. I don't think it befits anyone that is elected to the South West of Scotland to talk down the existing infrastructure within the area. But what he can be absolutely assured of is that our priority is not having a 6-lane M8. It is about making sure we get the right infrastructure in areas such as the South West of Scotland, and that's what we are committed to doing.
Question number 2, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the provision of superfast broadband in the Strathkelvin and Bearsden constituency.
Paul Wheelhouse.
Latest figures produced by Ofcom show that 97% of premises in Strathkelvin and Bearsden can already access a superfast broadband connection. Our Reaching 100% programme will ensure that every home and business can access superfast broadband by the end of 2021. This commitment will be delivered through the R100 contracts for North, Central and South Scotland, our Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme and commercial deployment within Strathkelvin and Bearsden area. Ms Mackay's constituents will either benefit through commercial deployment or through our investment, and our online checker can show people when they might expect work to begin to connect their premises.
Rona Mackay.
Thank the Minister for that answer. My constituents in Baldernock have been patiently waiting for fibre broadband connection for many years and are now finally on course to receive it. However, there have been delays due to incorrect data being collected, and this is crucial in the R100 procurement status. Can the Minister confirm if this issue has been looked at with some urgency to allow households to take advantage of the voucher scheme and finally get connected?
Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank Rona Mackay for that question. Certainly Ms Mackay raised a very important matter, and I know there's been exchanges of emails over the last week on this. The status reported in our online checker is informed by data sourced from commercial providers, and this data is then cross-checked against other data sources to ensure consistency before it's reflected in our online address checker. There are agreed monitoring plans in place with regular updates received from broadband providers throughout the year, and any changes reflected in the online checker. In a data set of more than 2.8 million premises, however, we can expect that there may be some discrepancies, as is the case in Baldernock. I want to reassure Ms Mackay that the R100 team is speaking to the Community Council and broadband providers in the area to resolve this issue as quickly as possible, but rest assured any premises that find themselves outside the coverage of the R100 programme itself can get superfast broadband from or from a commercial provider, can get superfast broadband through the R100's Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme, and I look forward to keeping in touch with Ms Mackay on that.
Question number 3, Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when the conclusion of the review of the upgrade to Sheriff Hall roundabout will be published.
Michael Matheson.
The review work being undertaken on Sheriff Hall forms part of our statutory responsibility to fully consider objections and representations received to the proposed scheme. I understand that Transport Scotland recently held a productive workshop with officials from the various City Region deal partners, and that the review work is now developed sufficiently to progress the resolution of objections. The conclusion of the review will be shared in due course as we continue to take forward the statutory process for the scheme.
Michelle Ballantyne.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As you will know, councils across the south east of Scotland are dealing with rapidly rising populations. They're sticking to their end of the deal by building more affordable homes, but they are being let down when it comes to access to our city. We need development at Sheriff Hall, and we do need it urgently. I understand that the funding for the upgrade is already in place, but can you confirm, has any deal been done to delay or stop this development? And can you say that there won't be a delay to the scheme once you get the results of this review? And can you start to give a firm date for when the ground will be broken at Sheriff Hall?
Michael Matheson.
Signing Officer, several different issues raised in there. The first is that no, there is no plan to stop this project. It's still one which we are very much committed to. It's £120 million of investment, which forms part of the South East Scotland City Region deal, which we are progressing. The review is looking at the feasibility and desirability to enhance active travel and public transport infrastructure in the actual project itself, and that's what it has a specific focus on. And the need to do that is reflected in the statutory process that has to be undertaken, and that is that where objections are received, and there have been objections, that we have to look to try and address those. If we can't get the objections removed, then it will go to a public local inquiry. That all then determines the actual timescale for delivery of the project. So there's a statutory process that we have to undertake here, and part of that gives the opportunity for those who are landowners, residents and businesses to make objections, and those have to be taken seriously and considered. And that's exactly what's happening at this particular point. And once that statutory process has been completed and concluded, you can then set the time frame for the completion of the project itself.
Short supplementary, please, from Christine Graham.
take your advice, certainly, Deputy President. Cabinet Secretary, your colleague, the Finance Secretary, told Parliament yesterday that the delay to the UK Government's budget would of necessity mean the Scottish Government budget for next year would be provisional and that uncertainty running into billions of pounds. Will the UK budget delay and the knock-on effect of the Scottish Government's budget impact on the timetable for improvements to the Sheriff Hall roundabout, otherwise known to cyclists as the meat blender?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, there is serious concern about if there is delays to settling budgets that it could have an impact on a whole range of projects that are presently being undertaken and are also planned, which is why it's absolutely critical that the UK Government recognise the importance of giving clarity to the Scottish Government in terms of budgetary requirements. Alongside that, we saw in the course of the last week the announcement of a union connectivity review with a desire on the part of the UK Government to start to set priorities, project priorities on transport in Scotland, and what appears to be an intention to almost cut part of our capital spending allocation so that it can be reprioritised to the areas that they see as being a priority. The type of what we can see power grab that has become we've become accustomed to from the UK Government, but one that could, the type of approach that could have an impact on the very project that Christine Graham has made reference to, that Michelle Ballantyne says is critical to the Edinburgh economy, the type of short-sightedness we have come to be used to from the UK Government in these matters.
Question number 4, Johann Lamont.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with transport operators in Glasgow regarding compliance with the wearing of face coverings on public transport.
Excuse me, Ms Lamont. We're now on question 4. Question 3 is over, so can we please stop shouting across the chamber? Ms Lamont, if you would start again. Sorry about that.
It's usually me that's getting a row for shouting, so it's nice being a different side of the matter. Anyway, to ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with transport operators in Glasgow regarding compliance with the wearing of face coverings on public transport.
Michael Matheson.
Transport Scotland is in regular dialogue with transport operators who have been reminded, as per Scottish Government guidance, that they are expected to consider displaying prominent signage highlighting that face coverings must be worn, and also that their staff may inquire if a passenger is not wearing a face covering and remind them of their legal obligation to do so unless they are exempt. Transport Scotland officials continue to monitor, in conjunction with operators, levels of compliance with the legislation. Guidance and legislation remains under review.
Johann Lamont.
Thank you. In recent weeks, there have been several reports regarding the significant number of people not wearing a mask in buses. Just last week, First Bus contacted every school in Glasgow over concerns about the significant number of pupils flouting the rules, a situation which, quote, is putting drivers' lives at risk. Given this concern, will the Minister himself directly make a commitment to engage with transport operators in Glasgow, Police Scotland, Glasgow City Council and all the relevant agencies to ensure enough support is in place to protect drivers in operating safely and to ensure that all passengers are aware of and cooperate with the national guidance?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, Joanne Lamont raises an important issue, and I recognise the concerns which she has expressed, which is why we have regular dialogue with transport operators to make sure that they are reinforcing the message around the need to wear face coverings. The member raises a specific issue around school pupils. This was an issue which was identified a number of weeks ago when the schools returned after the summer term. And at that particular point, we took proactive action in engaging directly with local authorities to make sure that they were communicating the need for face coverings to be worn by school pupils when they were on public transport. Alongside that, at particular locations, for example, we have worked with British Transport Police and Police Scotland to make sure that there are officers at key hubs encouraging school pupils to make sure that they have face coverings. But what I can assure the member is that we will continue to engage with local authorities to make sure that they're getting that message across as effectively as possible to parents and to the school pupils themselves. And we'll continue to look at what further measures we can take in order to make sure that we encourage people to wear face coverings when they're on public transport, not only for their own protection, but critically also for those who work on our public transport system.
Excuse me, Ms Crowell-Hamilton, there's a bit of a loud discussion going on here at the back. If you want to carry it on, could you go elsewhere?
dubiety over the seating plan that was drawn up by the Bureau.
Is this a point of order, Mr Mountain?
It is a point of order.
Okay, point of order, Mr Mountain.
There is some dubiety about the seating plan, and I'm being asked to vacate the seat. My understanding from the Bureau maps that was produced that the seats have been allocated, this one to the Conservative and 2 to the Liberal Democrats. If that is entirely wrong, Presiding Officer, I am happy to move out of the chamber on your instructions.
Okay, well, I'm not going to start telling people where to sit, so can I refer you to your business manager, please, and to members of other groups who have problems to their business managers as well. And could I ask those in the chamber who don't have questions to ask if they could keep the noise down a bit. And I call question 5, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the potential impact on traffic levels on the A90, M90 of planned housing developments.
Michael Matheson.
Scottish planning policy sets out that planning authorities are expected to appraise the impact of their development plan, SPATO strategies, including planned housing developments on the transport network. This should include the potential impact on the trunk road traffic and identification of mitigation measures where appropriate. Transport Scotland collects and processes land use allocation data, including those for planned housing development, from every planning authority in Scotland every 2 years. This data is used in relevant land use and transport models to appraise transport interventions as required.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. Last week, a developer unveiled a new master plan for Echlin in Queensferry. This involves 1,000 new homes, as well as new supermarkets, shops and restaurants. It's a massive development. However, without changes to the A90 access at Queensferry, the key road in and out of the town will have to run through the middle of this new estate and right past the new primary school. The Scottish Government has previously refused my request to consider reopening the old Forth Road Bridge A90 slip roads. However, with this massive new plan, this change has become critical. So will he agree to meet with me and local councillors to ensure that we can get a solution that works for this growing part of my constituency?
Michael Matheson.
Well, first of all, I should reassure the member that as it stands at the present moment, before the planning application can be considered in detail, there will be a need for a full transport assessment to be undertaken as part of that planning process. My understanding is for this particular development that the planning assessment is to consider several key areas which would all have an impact on the existing local road network and also on the M90 at the Queensferry crossing area. What I can assure the member is that once that transport assessment has been completed, it will be considered by Transport Scotland officials. And following that assessment, they'll be in a position where they can identify what mitigation measures would need to be put in place. So what I'd say to the member is that there is an assessment process that needs to be undertaken in relation to transport, and once that assessment has been completed, we'll be in a better position to understand what appropriate mitigation measures need to be put in place.
Quick supplementary, please, from Mark Ruskell.
One significant way to reduce traffic levels on the M90 would be to extend the Edinburgh tram line to Fife. But the regional spatial strategy does identify that councils and developers will not have the funds to be able to put a project like that forward and successfully to complete it. What kind of commitment can the government give to funding projects that have been identified by the spatial strategy for the region?
Michael Matheson.
Well, the member correctly identifies a project of this nature would be a matter for the local authorities to consider taking forward, and at the present moment they've made no representation to myself in relation to a project of that nature. However, it would be one which we'd be happy to engage with them on if that was their intentions, but it is one that they would have to fund through their own existing funding structure.
Question number 6, Sandra White.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the enforcement of the pavement and double parking provisions in the Transport Scotland Act 2019.
Michael Matheson.
The Transport Scotland Act 2019 is a multi-topic act with an extensive number of statutory instruments needed to implement the various parts. Progress in each part of the Act, including the parking prohibitions, is dependent on parliamentary timescales and priorities, which have been affected by the current COVID-19 outbreak and EU exit preparations. Given these factors and the fact that the work on the secondary legislation programme is in an early stage, we are currently unable to give a precise date as to when the pavement and double parking prohibitions will come into force. However, I will ensure that Parliament is kept up to date on these matters.
Sandra White.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his reply and also the very detailed reply to the letter correspondence which I sent him. I understand the situation with COVID and legislation going through, but can the Cabinet, and obviously will update the Parliament, can the Cabinet Secretary, I know can't give definitive times, but whether, can he indicate whether this guidance will be finalised before dissolution?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, implementation planning for the parking provisions in the Act were paused, as I mentioned, during the course of the pandemic. That work has now restarted, so I want to reassure the member it is a priority. We try to make progress with that, and officials are currently developing an updated timeline for the secondary legislation and the consultation requirements for the implementation of the parking provisions within the Act, and I can assure the member is kept up to speed with that. Alongside that, my officials have also engaged extensively with stakeholders, including local authorities, on the development of the parking standards guidance, which will underpin the parking provisions. So I will ensure that we make progress with this as quickly as we can, and I'll certainly make sure that the member is kept up to date with the timelines around the provisions within the Act.
Number 7, John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to improve road connectivity in South Ayrshire.
Michael Matheson.
This Government recognises the importance of a connected, safe, resilient and high-quality strategic transport network for South Ayrshire. Since 2007, we've invested £75 million in the maintenance of the A77, £50 million on the A78 and are spending £29 million on building the Maybole bypass. Good progress is being made on the construction of the bypass, which will provide benefits for the residents of Maybole, as well as improving connections to the port of Loch Ryan. Any further enhancements to either the A77 or the A78 is a matter for consideration as part of the STPR2 process.
John Scott.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. However, he will be aware that both the Dutch House roundabout and the Whitlets roundabout were identified as pinch points in the Strategic Transport Review number 2. You will also be aware of the need for the dualling of the A77 between the Whitlets and Holmeston roundabout, which was identified in the first Strategic Projects Review in 2008. To date, no action has been taken on upgrading these roundabouts or dualling the A77. So will the Cabinet Secretary give a commitment to these projects that will now indeed be taken forward?
I'd appreciate a quick answer, Cabinet Secretary. Michael Matheson.
I can certainly give the member a commitment that we will consider these issues as part of the STPR2 process, as has been identified in the initial appraisal which was published a number of months ago for the South West of Scotland.
Question number 8, Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to make the transport system more affordable and accessible for people living in poverty.
Michael Matheson.
The National Transport Strategy, which underpins our investment in these areas, sets reducing inequalities as a key priority and states that everyone in Scotland will share in the benefits of modern and accessible transport system. The first annual National Transport Strategy Delivery Plan will be published by the end of this year, setting out our actions to deliver the strategy's priorities. In 2019, there were 1.4 million people with national concessionary travel cards in Scotland. We are progressing a review of concessionary travel on all public transport to those under the age of 26 and have begun the necessary preparatory work to deliver a national concessionary travel scheme for free bus travel for under-19s.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This year's Challenge Poverty Week takes place against the backdrop of COVID-19, but even before the pandemic we saw a rising tide of poverty, and a key cause was high costs with transport in particular, which is often unaffordable for people on low incomes. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what the new timescale is for the introduction of free bus travel for people under the age of 19? And will he listen to the calls from Poverty Alliance to urgently extend this to all under 25s who are hardest hit at the moment by unemployment, and also those on universal credit, to loosen the grip of poverty on their lives?
Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, I can assure the member that as part of the review that we are undertaking on the present concessionary schemes is that tackling child poverty is a key element that is being considered as part of that assessment, and I expect that work to be completed by the end of this year. Given that work was also paused during the course of the pandemic on preparations around the concessionary travel for under-19s, that work has now restarted and we are looking to identify the time frame for its delivery going forward. But I can assure the member that tackling poverty, and in particular young people who experience poverty and the difficulty that can cause for them associated with the cost of transport, that's a central part of the factor we're considering as part of the review work that's already been undertaken.
That concludes portfolio questions. Apologies to those that I wasn't able to take the supplementaries, and we'll move on to the next item of business.
Thank you, colleagues.